This lecture synthesizes 10 years of experience as a high school debater at 2 different schools, as a college debater at 2 different universities, and as a coach at upwards of 10 different high schools and 2 different universities, and a lab leader at a litany of camps, and then for 8 years running at the Gonzaga Debate Institute in Spokane, Washington. So a roadmap before I inevitably don't cover and drop the bottom is I'm going to talk about basically 9 different things here and then wrap it all up together. So there's going to be 9 little different components of this. You'll see snazzy transitions between it, courtesy of Eric Bean, the other half of the Erics of Turns case. So the overview for this is that we're going to start by talking about my background, which I sort of gave you just a little snapshot of, but in more detail to situate some context for the rest of the things I'm going to talk about. And then second, we're going to talk about sort of what I call my greatest hits of debate war stories, or my 10 favorite anecdotes that I'll reference throughout the lecture. And I like to tell a lot of stories, and I think that that's one of the best ways to learn about debate, is to access that institutional memory of debate. The third part is going to be Strategy 101. I'm going to begin to introduce some of the concepts we're going to talk about for the rest of the lecture, that's sort of where the title comes from, How to Win, the strategic concepts that you need to apply to debate in order to be successful. The fourth part is going to be my role models and sort of a bunch of coaching advice that I've stolen from other people. I think that that's one of the key takeaways of this, is that you need to be learning from everyone you interact with in debate, whether or not it's what to do or what not to do. And so it's really helpful to have access to a diverse perspective, a range of coaching. The next part is going to be the more lecture component and less storytelling, although there will probably be some stories that sneak up there. But we're going to talk about the key concepts from all of the things above and apply each of them as a specific example for one of the strategic tools, define some vocab words, that kind of stuff before we move forward. And then in the 7th section, I'm going to give you a lot of specific tips for how to implement this stuff. One thing I hear a lot is, Lanning, I know what to do now, but how do I do it? So we're going to focus in that section on actionable things that you could do right now to materialize these. And then next, we'll talk about practice, and then in the final section, we'll talk about in your next debate. So sort of both sides, before you show up and when you get there, what you should do to win debates. So one of the first tips that I'm going to give you is that if you say you're going to do something in a debate, you should do it. So I'm going to try to stick to the roadmap that you just watched before. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is my background. So when I started in debate, I debated at the Woodlands High School, and we had a sponsor, but she did not have that much experience with debate, especially policy debate at the highest level. So a lot of my early career in debate was spent teaching myself, or my partner Leah and I teaching each other, or what we established a network that we called Team Leah, which was a series of our friends and people that we knew in high school and other coaches that helped us. And I mean, by the end of the year, this was like a 90-person Facebook group. So I come from a very small school background, but the next part of my biography, I go to Michigan State University, which, to use an analogy, is the Yankees of debate. They have a very, very well-established program and a recipe and a model for success. So I entered in the sort of opposite spectrum. I went from being the small school, David and Goliath, to being Goliath at Michigan State. And I eventually left Michigan State and transferred back to the University of Houston, where I'm from, Houston. So the experience there, starting up a new team, the program was in its 2nd year when we got into the quarterfinals of the NDT. So, we were a big team in terms of membership, but a young team. So I think that across the board, I have experienced as a competitor and as a coach, basically the full spectrum of debate. So when I talk about some of these strategic concepts, I think it's important to know that I come from a background where I didn't always have the resources to execute each of these things, and a lot of my early training was self-taught. So I think that those principles and that background inform a lot of this. I think that to understand what I mean by some of these things, you have to know that I started off as the 2-person team of the Woodlands LM, and my father traveled around the country with us and scouted our opponents, even though he knew nothing about debate. And we showed up at the TOC and had no idea what we were doing, and got to the semifinals. And then at Michigan State, I was part of a very, very strong squad team culture that knew exactly what it was doing and knew how to win the NDT, versus the University of Houston, where my main role has been helping to establish a legacy, and I sort of see my contribution to UH as what can I give to the future instead of, what did I do for them. So that context, I think, is important for the rest of the lecture, and that's just, a quick plug for Turn's Case, I'm hoping to turn what I just did, a little background on me, short explanation of where I come from, into a series that we're hoping to launch called Better Know a Debater. If you've seen the Colbert series, you'll be familiar with the concept, but I think that it is important that debate gets some good PR, and one of the ways we do that is by talking about our experiences in it. So, spoiler alert, this was the first edition of Better Know a Debater, Eric Lanning. So this is the second part of the lecture, which is a collection of stories in really no particular order, although the last one is my favorite one, spoiler. So the first story that I want to share with you is the Sleepy Lanning story. So I mentioned before my partner Leah. I had the privilege of debating with Leah in high school, but then also because of a series of complicated events in my life, I took years off of school, back and forth between debate, got to coach her at her last national debate tournament where her partner and her Paul reached the semifinals. So the debate before that, in the quarters, I was very, very tired. I had stayed up for many hours working for Gonzaga KM, and they were ready for this debate, doing really well, and I was sitting in the back highlighting something, and I fell asleep. And that would not be a very good story, but my debate partner from Michigan State University, Carly, came up, and she had coached Gonzaga the year before, and she just started highlighting on my computer. MSU was out of the tournament, and instead of waking me up, she just finished my assignment, which is a perfect metaphor for Carly and I's relationship. She was constantly covering for me. The recurring theme of our partnership was like, Lanning dropped this thing, Carly saved the day. So that story is one of my favorite because I think it really encapsulates how the relationships that you build in debate are critical to your success. The relationships that I had with Leah and Carly were strong enough that, 8 years after we debated in high school, there I was coaching Leah, and after Carly and I were at different institutions and no longer debating with each other, there she was highlighting for me. So I think that that Sleepy Lanning story is one of my favorites because it shows how interdependent we are and how important friendship is to being successful at debate. So number 9, the TOC prep and Laughing Bird. So Leah and I in high school, I mentioned, had no one to practice debate against, so we would constantly debate each other. It was like an endless 2AC, 2NC back and forth, just ongoing, the two of us debating each other on whatever we were doing. And during our prep for the TOC for the whole month, we prepped at her house, and her parents were bird sitting, which is a strange thing, this parrot that had this evil cackle, and it would just laugh at me, not Leah, but me, relentlessly. And so I have this image in my head whenever someone says the word practice or practice debate of this bird laughing and debating Leah because, that was my over experience, and that being able to look back and think about practice debating your own partner, like the concept of a two-person team, I think is really important because we learn from each other, just like I was mentioning before, when we compete against each other. So there's no excuses for not practicing. You can always have a practice debate. You can always give a practice speech because you have a partner if you do policy debate. So that's why that's my 9th favorite story. My 8th favorite story is kind of a ridiculous tale, but I just really want to tell this story because Dallas Perkins, who's the head coach at Harvard and a distinguished debate coach, competitor, everything, he's hilarious. He has this habit of talking during debates, and he has an accent of which I'm going to impersonate slightly, but he judged my partner and I in this elimination round against a very good Kansas team who had broken a not very good dissent. And it was right after the underwear bomber, if you'll recall, who attempted to, attack Detroit, but was apprehended. So their disadvantage was about Obama needing to focus on the underwear bomber in order to, protect and prevent a terror attack. And after the debate, Dallas looks up and says, "Well, focus DA still blow, and I'm pretty sure that guy set himself on fire and they already caught him." And Dallas is just my favorite person ever, and I mostly just wanted to tell that story to do that impression of him. But the moral that I take away from that a lot is that sometimes it's important to step back from the debate and just think about, do things make sense? And this was a really good Kansas team who had other arguments in the debate they could have gone for, but this argument just didn't really make sense. And sometimes that realization requires us to step back and have a Dallas moment where we just say, not a winner. So that's the takeaway from number 8. Number 7, this is a great one. Greta Stahl, who was my coach at Michigan State University, helped Leah and I at the TOC. This is one of the few tournaments where we had like a really strong, good, professional, she knew what she was doing, NDT champion and an amazing coach. So we're getting ready for this ELIM debate. We're talking about our new affirmative, and she's asking us some questions. She says, well, what's your answer to the state's counter plan? It's a domestic topic. reasonable question. We had no idea what she was talking about. And our answer was like, well, we'll go for theory. Like, she's like, no, but like, your affirmative, which, funds debate coaches at high schools, why can't the states do that? And we were like, I guess they sure could, because it had just never occurred to us. And that moment comes back to me a lot, where as a sort of growing moment for me, that we had stumbled our way into the elimination rounds of the TOC, but we really were just kind of making up as we went. And that's kind of an important concept that we'll talk about later in the lecture, is both fake it till you make it. You need to act like it even if you don't cut all the pieces, but also, you can always learn more. Even when you're at the highest levels of success or peaking, there's something for you to learn. And that moment comes back to me for both of those. That's why it's number 7. Number 6. This is just a collection of random D-High quotes from the beginning and end of my career. These are all quotes. He judged me in this debate where the entire negative block, we were negative, was topicality substantially lacks material qualifications. So 13 minutes of that, and after the debate he said that it was the best defense of stupidity that he had ever heard. And take that one to the bank. The next time he judged Woodland's LM, we broke an affirmative about giving the military more dentists. And we had these cards from the Journal of Military Dentistry Studies, check it out, that were phenomenal about how, when we went to deploy troops, if they didn't have good teeth, you had to send them back, and just all sorts of stuff that made a series of counterintuitive arguments about how dentists were key to hegemony. And D-Height, after reviewing our cards after the debate, agreed with our assessment that it was pretty good, pretty important for hegemony, which I thought was funny. And then fast forward 4 years, and he judges me in the final round of the national debate tournament and writes in his ballot that Michigan State was one of the most well-prepared teams he'd ever seen at the national debate tournament. So we went from scrambling to 13 minutes of tea in the block to the dentist aff to one of the most well-prepared teams. So, a lot of that is going to be related to things that we talk about later, but that's why it's number 6. It's just a random collection of D-High quotes. Number 5 is from the national security topic. You see those trophies right there. All of them were Houston RLs. So number 5 is a shout out to Tanwir Rajwani, my partner last year at Houston. And we read this affirmative that was about drone strikes, but also about a traditional tribal dispute mechanism called a jirga. And hospitality was a central element of it. And so this one early debate when we had this affirmative, Tanwir just said, thank you for your contribution, next. And then in the one area I was like, this is a permutation. Like, the whole point of our affirmative was hospitality. We invited them, so whatever they said during the debate is part of our argument. And this is like very strategically questionable argument, but we won on that. And so it turned into this whole thing of thank you, do both, instead of permutation, do both. So my number 5 favorite story is the politest permutation you'll ever meet, Tanwir Rajwani. Number 4 on the UH trend is my coach, Sarah Spring. As we were getting ready for the NDT, she was writing this affirmative and had this moment where she looked up and she's like, how could we have not, how did we forget about the 25th Amendment? For context, the topic was about the president's war powers, and the only arguments we had made all year were about disability. So we're trying to thread the dots between presidential war powers, presidential power, and disability. The 25th Amendment is about what happens if the president becomes disabled. So it was just this thing that was right in front of us the whole time that, it took us till the end of the season, and we were undefeated on the affirmative at the national debate tournament with that affirmative. So that's one of those things, it's like, how did we not see this? But it also worked out perfectly in the end. So that's why that's my number 4. Number 3, and this is reverses, it's a coaching moment that I had with one of my favorite students that I've ever coached. I was coaching for Stratford, and Hemanth, before the debate, was really worried about this counterplan they didn't have that great of answers to, and we just didn't have that much time to fix it, and it probably solved the AF. We were in trouble, and I had no idea what to do, so I gave him some ideas, but I walked in right before the debate with a jump drive and gave it to him, and I was like, hey, Hemanth, here's that 2AC to that counterplan, and it said what it was. I can't even remember, it's tax credits or something like that. It's too long, you need to cut some of this stuff, and you need to get highlighting, all the backlines are just way too long. And then I walked out of the room, and this team read this counterplan and then kicked it. So it worked. So Hemanth, the answers are on the jump drive, the Jedi mind trick, it does work sometimes. That's why this is my number 3 favorite story. Number 2, and this is a recurring story / recurring nightmare. Not really, I love Dave Strauss a lot, so that's context for this, but this is just a quote. That was the worst speech that I have ever heard. How do we win debates? Which is something that Strauss said to me over and over again as we were preparing for the NDT. Just every time I gave a speech, he was brutal. And these setups that he gave me were impossible. I mean, impossible. The 2AC made 50 answers to the dissad. And then, when I dropped something, oh, you're awful. But Strauss was not there to be, he was my friend. He was one of my closest friends. I'm really excited to go to his wedding soon, but he wasn't there to tell me nice things about me. He was there to help me get better at debate, and the intensity with which he did that and the rawness of it is one of my favorite things about Strauss. He will not mislead you about something. He's going to give it to you. So that's why Dave Strauss telling me I was the worst speaker he had ever heard and asking how we won any debates was my second favorite debate story. My first one is sort of probably pretty obvious for other people, but in my mind it's not necessarily correlated. But the final round of the national debate tournament, one of my favorite stories to tell is before the debate started, the last moments, I'm walking up to the podium with the 1AC and the timer to start. I had been preparing in another room, and my coach, Will Repko, looks to me and says, how do you feel? And I turn back around, I'm powerfully walking into the room, there's a good setting. I'm just I feel like we had this debate 1,000 times in East Lansing, and we've already won. And I turned around and walked up and gave the speech. And that overconfidence, I wouldn't call it overconfidence, but almost maybe, came from a series of things that had happened throughout the tournaments where our preparation had just kept paying off. And I really did feel like I had read that 1AC 1,000 times because for 30 days before the NDT, I had woken up in the morning, Repko had picked me up, I'd read the 1AC, and then he'd cross-X me. And when I stood up after finishing the 1AC on that podium, the first question that Matt Fisher asked me, very talented debater from Northwestern, in a debate that we've still almost lost even though it's a 5-0, asked me a question, and it was the same question that Will had asked me every single day, the first question. So it was this powerful moment where before the debate I was we've had this debate, and then during the debate I was we've had this debate. I stopped Carly before the 2AC and I was just don't drop anything. She's yeah, I know, here I am debating in the final round of the NDT, and I was no, but we can beat all these things, we just need to not drop anything. And that collection of moments for me is all related to this sort of, it worked. If you practice really hard and you work really hard every single day for a long time, it pays off. And that is why that is my favorite #1 debate story. So this is part 3 of the lecture, what I'm calling Strategy 101. So the central thing that I'm about to tell you in a bunch of different ways, that's one trick of debate. The most important thing you should say a couple of different ways. If you say it just once, that might not be as effective as spreading it out, but it's important not to repeat yourself directly. So the central piece of advice I'm about to give you, what strategy in debate is don't go on autopilot. And I'll sort of unpack what I mean by autopilot. A lot of times when I'm judging debates, or even when I was in debates, I had the moment earlier that story that I shared about, what's your answer to the state's counterplan? That was one of those autopilot moments. We had just not thought about that. We were just doing it. And so sometimes after debates, I'll be well, why did you do this? And they'll be I have no idea, I did it. So not that. Strategy is the process of interrupting that and thinking and being intentional about what you're doing. So one way I like to frame this is you need to constantly be asking yourself, why? Be that annoying child, when we walk around, we're why? Do that. That is the quintessential takeaway from Strategy 101 is that you need to be asking yourself why you are doing certain things and why you are not doing certain things. So why did I spend that much time on this? Was that the best answer? Why did I say this way, et cetera, all the way down. So just for everything that you're doing, attach a why to it, or a why not. So that is going to lead into my sort of first piece of advice in Strategy 101, which is you need to be judging the debate. Excellent debaters are very good at evaluating arguments and truthfully assessing things. You often hear good debaters quoted after the debate by the judge, or the RFD that's written on the ballot will be just quotes. In the best debates, in my opinion, the RFD is sort of written during the 2N and 2AR, so you can't do that if you're not judging the debate. And so I think one key strategic takeaway is you never 100% win anything, no matter how good you are or how much better you are than your opponent. So a key element of strategy is being honest and making assessments about it. So don't sort of trick yourself or don't mislead yourself when you're judging the debate. So you need to be proactively thinking, this is their best argument. We don't have a very good answer to this. This didn't really make sense when I was saying this, so I need to spend more time on those type of assessments are what's going to lead to the strategic vision that's going to eventually help you win debates and help you sort of automate in a good way without being autopilot some of these processes. So muscle memory for doing something right after practicing it is different than being on autopilot. So that's a concept that I'm going to talk about later, that when you practice something, execute on the same argument over and over and over again, you begin to sort of do some of it automatically. That is a good process, and you should work on doing that by practicing, but autopilot is different. It's sort of the unintentional just, and then I did this. So don't do that. Judge the debate. Don't go in with an overconfidence about your own arguments or undersell your opponent's arguments. That's not a very effective way to win a debate. So both of those pieces of advice fold into my next one, which is a meta comment and a quote from my coach Will Repko from his lecture that he gives to the MSU debaters about how to win, which is control what you can control. And I think this is a really profound piece of debate coaching advice. I'm going to mention it later again. I'm going to repeat it again. That's the sometimes repeating your most important argument or a really tricky argument, explaining it a couple of different ways, explaining it in your speech, then in cross-ex, or folding it in to other things can be really helpful. But this piece of Repko advice I think is so profound because it's both a call to action and a call to let go of some things, right? So control what you can control means you have to decide between these two categories. There's this list of things that we could do to maximize our chances for winning a debate, and there are these other things that are just outside of our control. We play a persuasive game, and there's an element of contingency to debate that no matter what you do, if you do everything right, if you did everything possible, you could still lose. Especially when your opponents are of such a high caliber that you're going to find at the TOC and the NDT and the NDCA and all of the national tournaments. Sometimes things are just outside your control. Sometimes the timer runs out on the judge and they just have to make a decision. We are humans, we err, and so I think it's important to have that frame of mind. And the other profound element of this is Repko taught me that there were so many aspects of the debate I thought you couldn't control that you can. And that sort of retraces to the why question. If you ask that why question about every single element of a debate, you will find that many things are inside your control. So I think that, my intuition would be that lots of stuff is outside your control and you can't. It's the opposite. Many of these things are totally inside your control and you can maximize your chances, but at the ultimate end of it, there's an element of risk in it and uncertainty, and you can't always, you never know you're going to win a debate. So these both relate to concepts that I've talked a lot about, but I'll synthesize this here. Your judge is a human. So one of the keys to winning a debate is understanding that sometimes you're going to win debates that you should have lost, and sometimes you're going to lose debates that you should have won because judges make mistakes. I, as a judge, know that looking back that I've learned a lot as I judge more, and I think about some of the decisions I made early on in my career, but judges are human and you need to watch them. That is one thing that I also notice in high school debate a lot distinguishes the most talented debaters from the people with the most potential that aren't quite getting there is pay attention to your judges. Remember that the most important person to persuade is not yourself, not your opponent. You're not arguing with your opponent, right? I see this all the time in cross-ex. They stand there and they stare at their opponent instead of the judge. It's like, who are you trying to persuade? Who has the ballot? So pay attention to the judge and remember that they're a human. They're going to be persuaded by certain things and not persuaded by certain things. And paying attention to them, their paradigm, their body language, the way that they coach their teams, all of those things are things that are inside your control, but their decision is not. So this, again, the idea of you can control a lot of aspects of this, but not their decision. So a core piece of strategic advice that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of the lecture that I'll sort of reference shorthand is think backwards. A lot of times you find that when you make a mistake in debate, the solution is not immediate. It's not right there, right? So if you are making coverage errors and you drop something in the 2 and R, the most likely solution to that is not necessarily to change your 2 and R, although that probably will come with it eventually, but to fix the 1 and C, to have more diverse options so the 2AC can't make as many arguments for what you eventually go for, or to change your block division so that that 1AR was tougher so they couldn't, et cetera, et cetera. So I think tracing back and figuring out places before the tournament, before the season, before the round, before that speech, right? Trace it back as far as you can and think as far backwards as you can is one of the keys to begin to really thinking about debate strategically and not just, this is a speech I gave, but this is a collection of strategic tools, of arguments that have been crafted in a particular way to yield a particular result. So thinking backwards is going to help you maximize your chances of winning. So instead of just tweaking the 2 and R, we're going to think, well, why did the 1 and C, the 2, all the way back? So stretch it as far back as you can is a core piece of strategic advice that I give all of the time in debate. A piece of advice that's stolen that you're going to hear in the next section again too is never lose to the same argument twice. I think this is one of the most profound things that I've heard about debate. I'm sure someone else has said it too, but the Duck, coach at Northwestern, is the person that told me this. And yes, the first time you lose to something, it's okay. You have to lose to get better at debate. A story I didn't share earlier, but I will now. I went 1-7 at the Kentucky round robin when I was a sophomore and was heartbroken and really down on debate and ended up quitting during the middle of the season. I returned 2 seasons later and went 8-0 and was the top speaker. So you have to lose to win. I have a 50-50 record at that round robin despite being undefeated at it. So that is weird. And I think that it's really important to take away from the Ducks lesson that it's okay to lose to something. What's not okay is to keep losing to the same thing, right? You should be doing something different to change that. So the first time is free, but after that, you really should strive to not be losing to the same arguments. After you lose a debate, instead of walking into the hallway, you should take 5 minutes to type up a block to that argument. Those are the types of habits that you'll always see among Northwestern debaters, which is one of the reasons why they're really successful. But, take a moment after you lose to something to think about why you lost and do something to correct it. If you just keep doing the same thing without changing anything, you are likely to get the same result. And the Ducks' piece of advice that you shouldn't lose to the same thing twice, I think is a call to action, but also sort of a way to forgive ourselves for losing to something first and recognizing that that's how we grow and that you gotta lose at something before you win at it. So a lot of what I've talked about before relies on a distinction between strategy and tactics. So when we talk later in the lecture, I'm going to give you a range of both of these things, but I think it's important to distinguish meta strategy in debate, how you're going to approach the topic, how you're going to approach preparation, how you practice, all of these different elements that will be spelled out later, and some of them have already been spoiled, but tactics are making a minor change. Strategy is seeing the whole thing. So one thing I like to say is, don't miss the forest for the trees. I think that's very important for debate strategy. It's real easy to do that. It's real easy to get lost in the mechanics of one thing and miss the bigger picture. For instance, you could be having a debate back and forth about severance permutations, and it could not matter at all for the outcome of the debate. So in that moment, you're all in that one thing, but that is letting a tactic or a piece of a strategy distract you from the wider purpose. So the bigger vision is really important for a lot of these things. My next piece of advice is something that I say to the UH debaters all of the time and any of the debaters that I coach, but good arguments, great arguments can certainly win you debates, but good debaters do win you debates, even when they have bad arguments. And it goes without saying that good debaters make good arguments, but I think my counterintuitive piece of advice is that there's this funny story I like to tell. You could give Rashid a newspaper as he was walking into the tournament and he would win with it. The best debaters can execute on arguments that are not perfect, and there's no such thing as a perfect argument. See, that's the trick, is there are really good debaters, and if you spend all of your time designing the perfect argument and none of your time getting better at debate, practicing execution, you're not going to win, because debate is not a robot, submit your speech documents contest. You could have the perfect 1AC and still lose every single debate. But if you are really good at debate, even if your 1AC is not perfect, you're still going to win a lot of them. So I think the key takeaway for strategy is, it's important to have really high quality arguments, and there's a baseline, that you have to get past, but it is more important for you to be good at debate and for you to be able to execute really well on a range of arguments than to have the perfect argument. And this relates to a piece of advice that I'll give next, which is know your strengths and your weaknesses. I think it's really important to design your partnership and your preparation and your coaching and your strategy around a lot of these things. So I was good at the big picture of debate, and I used to be really fast, but coverage was never a strong suit. I always dropped something. In every 2NC that I gave for my entire career at Michigan State, I dropped an argument. But that was something that I knew, and my coaches knew, we kept hearing it, and my partners adapted to that in dynamic ways that, while I tried to work on it, helped make sure that we were still successful in spite of that weakness and allowed me to play to my strengths, which, they always said, you're real good at talking, but you sure can't cover. So Carly, when I debated with her, would prep backwards. She would just start at the bottom of the 2NC knowing that Lanning was very likely to drop the last whatever argument on politics. And it was just, we never had to have a little conversation. I dropped the last three. She's like, yeah, no, I got it. And she was just ready to go for everything. And she covered my back on a lot of those things. So that, I think, it's not just about knowing what you're good at, it's also about knowing what you're not that great at and finding ways to complement each other and recognizing that sometimes those are the same thing. So the thing that made me persuasive and get speaker awards was that I was going on these long rants that judges liked but were causing me to drop arguments. So it's like the strength was the weakness was the strength. So it's about designing a strategy that plays to that and minimizes your risks, maximizes your chances. The last piece of advice I'll give in Strategy 101 before we move on is it takes a village to do all of these things. You cannot do it alone. And one of the best ways to get better at debate is to create a network. And I think that that's so important, that you think of this as a game that you can't play by yourself. You have a partner, you should really use that resource. And if you don't talk to your partner or have regular meetings with your partner, you're missing out on a real good chance to improve. And if you just try to get better at debate by yourself, not going to work. It's important to teach yourself, and I think that I mentioned before that a lot of these things are going to sink more if you learn them yourself, but you learn from everyone that you meet in debate. And I think that you have to understand that nobody can do this alone. To win at the highest levels of debate, you need to have people on your side, and you need to have access to a range of people, which is kind of the reason why we made Turn's Case, because we're hoping to provide that. But that was Strategy 101, and we're going to explore all of these concepts in more concrete, and then circle back to more abstract way in later sections. So this is the fourth part of the lecture, and it's my top 10 favorite pieces of coaching advice or quotes that I either heard directly or through anecdote from other people. So number 10, I'm going to quote myself, but this is something that I said to the UH debaters before every debate that they had this season, before I walked out of the room, which was that you're majestic, you're beautiful, good luck, have fun. And I think that the reason why I say those things is because the last thing I want them to know before a debate is that I care more about them having a good time and learning something in a debate than winning or losing. And I think that that mindset is really important to winning. If you don't love the game, and if you're not playing this game because you love it, you will never win. No trophy will ever make you happy, I think is an important thing to keep in mind. And I think that all of the people I'm about to quote from would say something comparable to that. You've got to love the process if you want the outcome to mean anything. The outcome will never make you happy. Winning a trophy is not the way to love debate. If you love debate no matter what, and you remember that you're playing this game because it gives you something whether or not you win or lose. Debate is the only game that you can play and lose every time and still walk away a winner. And I think that that is why that I give that piece of coaching advice and why it's number 10 on my list. Number 9, we got a little preview of this before, but the wider concept of control what you can control. From Repco, I think that that is one of the most solid pieces of coaching advice, and it frames a lot of my understanding, not just because of my background, but just because how I approach debate. I think that's a really powerful sentiment, and one of the most important pieces of coaching advice I ever got, so I think it bears repeating, in a more formal way here. Number 9, and this is from Sarah Spring, the director of debate at the University of Houston, and this is something she said to me over and over and over again, is don't overthink this. Kind of like a last-minute reminder before the debate. Don't overthink this. Like, we have spent so much time thinking about this, and they have spent no time thinking about it. Like, just do the thing. Like, at a certain point, you can carry on too long asking the why question. At some point, you do need to stop and actually just do the thing. So, getting out of your head and just executing. And I think I talked a little bit earlier about muscle memory. I think that's important. So some of these things, I really like that piece of Sarah advice, and it was actually very helpful a lot of times before debates, because it's exactly what I needed to do, was to just stop overthinking things and go execute. So that's why it's number 9 on my list. No, number 8 on my list. Gabe is the next quote. And I love this quote from him, and I say it all of the time, and I think it's more profound, but it's also humorous. An eternal refrain of Gabe when he coached at Michigan State University was, think about it. And it's like both the punchline to a good joke, like when you say something funny, you can think about it. But it also was this rhetorical trope that really captures something, which is kind of the opposite of what Sarah just said above, but really flip sides of the same strategic coin. Strategy is all about balance. So both of those things can be true, but sometimes all you need to do is pause and think about it. And I think that that's, the anecdote I shared earlier about Dallas and the underwear bomber and the focus DA, I think echoes that logic of this just doesn't make sense. And sometimes it's really important to just pause and think in a most basic way about an argument or, what's going on in a debate. And Gabe has a really a talent for focusing attention on the most important thing. I think one of the reasons he was such a successful debater and such a great coach is because he really saw through all of what was happening and picked out the most important thing. And that's what he would say, think about it about. And so that's, I think, an important piece of advice. The next top 10 piece of coaching advice comes from Abby Shermer, who I work with at the Stratford Academy. She's my favorite boss ever, Boss Abby for life. And it's sort of a sassy quote, but it's persuasive speaking, activity, sorry, not sorry. And she would say this sometimes before debates to our debaters, and they're like, well, we want to say this, but we can't with the judge. And it's like, well, at the end of the day, you are here to persuade someone. And if you can't do that in the exact way that you want to, you should go join a speaking event or, just record videos and put them up on YouTube. But debate is a persuasive activity, and I think that Abby quote, especially the way she says it, is so perfect. I'm going to record it and put it up on the website at some point. But, this is what debate is. It is a persuasive game at the end of the day, and almost all of this coaching advice has to be situated in terms of your judge. There's no universal judge. Different judges think different things are persuasive. So that's why some of this advice might seem contradictory sometimes, but it's really about finding balance or finding what works in the right context. So that Abby advice of it's a persuasive activity is really important to bear in mind for everything that I'm telling you. There's no absolutes in debate. There's no always do this. There's no never do this. It's all shades of gray. The next one is a Dave Strauss classic, related to me being the worst speech ever that he has heard. Shut up and cover. Don't talk, cover. Don't talk. And this was his eternal reminder, and especially, not all the time, but before we were debating this Northwestern team that was just so majestic at making a million arguments, and we debated them in the final round of the NDT. Thank God we were AF, because we could not beat them. We were neg. I could not answer every argument that Stephanie Spees made in the 2AC and the 2NC. I just couldn't do it. But Strauss would constantly he knew that was my biggest weakness, was that I would go on these little tangents and not get to everything. And so the last thing he would say to me in a very blunt, direct way was, this is the thing you need to do. And I think that directness is why this is so high on my list of sort of really solid piece of coaching, is sometimes you just need to cover. And you got to be more efficient. But the takeaway from that is not necessarily for you, but that Strauss was speaking to my biggest weakness as a debater in a very direct way, and that's what coaching is. Coaching is about helping someone play up their strengths, but also helping them compensate for their weaknesses as a debater. The next one, and I know he'll love that I share this because he does feed all of the debaters, I promise, but Glenn Frappier of Gonzaga and all of the Zags say all the time, only winners eat, and it's a joke, and I've already sort of aggressively mentioned how much I think that losing is important to winning, and that you can be a winner in debate no matter what, because debate is the great activity whether or not you win a trophy. You get a lot about. Portable skills are better than trophies. But I love this quote from Glenn because it gets to the heart of it, which is, if you want to be rewarded in debate, you need to do something. If you expect people to work for you, you need to work for yourself. If you want to win, if you want the privilege or the benefits that are associated with victory, you have to put in the work. So you want to eat dinner, win a debate. And obviously I'm simplifying that, but I do love that the essence of that, which is that if you want something, you need to earn it. Which is kind of related to the next one, but not really. Again, I just wanted to quote Dallas, but not a winner. This is a line you'll hear Dallas say a lot, and I've overheard him saying it to his teams before debates, so that's why it's in coaching advice and not just random quotes. But that basic sort of just, no, that's not a very good argument, can sometimes be more helpful than starting with your specific concern. Dallas, of course, when he says that, has some reasons in his head why, but he starts with the claim and then provides the warrant. So it's not a winner because, not, well, this particular thing. Does it make sense? So I think that sequencing is important, and is a really good piece of strategic advice, is say what you mean and then explain it. Don't explain what you mean and then summarize it at the end, which is why that's one of my favorite pieces of coaching advice. The next couple are from debate legends, who I think I couldn't end this list without quoting one of these two, but number 3 and 2 are from the same person, so in no particular order. Scott Deathridge, the Duck of Northwestern, act like a winner. If you can't convince yourself that you're going to win a debate, how are you going to convince a judge? If you don't act like you're winning a debate, why will other people act like you're winning a debate? If you want to win, you need to behave in the way champions do, which is both a call to change some of your behaviors and practice more, push yourself harder, but also to exude a confidence. And I think that that's really important. A piece of advice I give all of the time is, fake it till you make it. You should do all the work to be a champion, but if you don't act like you already are, you will never attain that. And that little confidence, act like a winner, I think is one of the most important pieces of strategic advice. Don't project false confidence. Act like a winner means do the work to make that confidence real instead of a false confidence. The next quote from the Duck is about cross-sex, and I think this is just one of the best pieces of advice, and honestly, if you know one thing about cross-sex, it should be this quote: don't ask, argue. Don't ask, argue. And this relates to the comment I made before about how you should look at your judge, not your opponent. You're not trying to convince your opponent in cross-sex. Lawyers would say, don't ever ask a question in court you don't know the answer to. I wouldn't say the exact rule applies in debate, but the idea that you should be making arguments or priming arguments or explaining difficult to explain arguments. Sometimes the point of one of my cross-sex questions had nothing to do with the question. Oftentimes, nothing to do with the question. I would be asking the question only to explain something that I thought was tricky that the judge might have missed from before, or only to expose some aspect of something. Does that make sense? So it's not always about the question, it's about the argument you are setting up in cross-ex. And I think that piece of advice from the duck is so high on my list because I think that the best debaters repeatedly do that, and that you can win debates in cross-ex, and that it's hard to win debates without good cross-ex, and that is the most important piece of advice for it. And the last one, and this is my all-time favorite debate quote, and I'm going to attach it to the lecture in its entirety, so I'm just going to summarize it here, but Ross Smith of Wake Forest sent out this email after his team had done really well at the National Debate Tournament that just thanked all of the competitors. And the thesis of what Ross was saying was, when we win things, it matters because our opponents tried really hard. And when we lose, it's okay because we know they did too. And that none of this would mean anything if we didn't respect and value our opponents. This is a trope that came up in every thank you speech in the final round when I was in it. Competition brings out the best of us, and the quintessential thing about coaching is you learn from your opponents. And every time we show up to a debate tournament, it means something because of our opponents and the quality of a debate. We want to have the best debates. We want to get as close to the ideal as we can, and so you learn the most from your competitors. So the reason I like this Ross quote and that it's number one on my list of pieces of coaching advice is the best coach that you will ever find in debate are the people you're debating, and you should constantly be learning from your opponents, or else what is the point of any of this? So in this part of the lecture, we're going to talk about the key concepts for how to win or debate strategy and synthesize a lot of the things that we've been talking about before. So the first and most basic thing that we're going to talk about is offense versus defense, and that sounds very primary, but this is for all skill levels, and I think no matter how experienced you are in debate, this bears repeating that you both need a reason why you won the debate and a series of reasons why your opponents didn't win the debate, and I think that framing of it is really important. Offense is a reason why you've won the debate, regardless of the other technical aspects of how we define it in terms of a DA or a criticism or an advantage or harm. Any of the minutia, the vocabulary, sort of skirts the question that really matters, which is we win the debate because of this thing. They don't win the debate because of this thing. And identifying what those things are, I think, is sort of what this whole lecture has been about, and is the process you need to teach yourself, picking which arguments matter. So one of the basic ways of organizing these things in terms of strategy, right before a debate, would be, what is your primary offense? What is your best argument against the affirmative if you're negative? If you're affirmative, what is your best argument for what they're most likely to go for? And thinking in terms of that will help you organize, what is your best answer to the case? And sequencing your primary offense, what you think your best argument is, and you should try to go for your best arguments, I think, with a series of backup options. And I think that that's part of it, is early on in the debate, you want to have lots of sources of offense and lots of different types of defense. But by the end of the debate, you will have narrowed down to some of these aspects. And that's kind of the reason why earlier I talked about think backwards. If you're trying to fix something at the end of the debate, you oftentimes have to start way earlier. So the exact mix of how many offensive arguments you need, how diverse that range needs to be, how many defense, for some arguments, you only need one defensive argument. That is not true. If you're right about that, then that's a great way to win a debate. But I think that having a diversity of options will help you set up for later to go for the arguments that you think are true. So when I talk about backup options, I tend to categorize them in a couple of different ways. So you have your credible backup options, which that's your second, your third, your fourth best argument. These are still very good arguments you feel very confident about. They're just, not the one that you want to go for in this circumstance. And then you have some arguments that you might call stretch. And I mentioned earlier that I am strongly of the belief that the best debaters win debates, not the best arguments. So sometimes, you got to throw some stuff together. And some people are better at this and other people are worse at this. Stephanie Spees had this magical ability to take three different parts of the 2AC that you thought were nothing and assemble them together into this beautiful 2AR. When I debated with Gus Ezagari from Michigan State, he also had this talent. He could work with nothing in the 2AR and just sell it. He could pin these different pieces together. So we oftentimes won debates on what wasn't our primary or, the best argument going into the debate or what we thought we were going to win on, but, some ridiculous scenario. So, sometimes that happens, but only if you give yourself that option by setting up the 2AC to give that 2AR. And then the last type of sort of backup option that I talk about is the eject button, where I'll often tell teams that I'm coaching, what is an insulated source of offense? What is disconnected or separate from the rest of the things we've talked about that could be a way that we win the debate? And you want to have one of those. So if you're negative, a lot of times this is topicality. Or if you're affirmative, this could be theory. But these type of arguments that are completely distinct from everything else that's happening are really important for thinking about strategy. And one of the most important concepts, you need insulated offense because of one of the things we're going to talk about in just a second. Right now, all arguments are connected. And a debate is not just what you go for, it's all the things that happened around it too. So it's really important to pay attention to the ways that arguments interact with each other. And you'll see the best debaters do this, these pivot points of arguments. Oh yeah, they've got a really big case, but our dised turns it. Those little flip arguments, I think of them sometimes in terms of a sports analogy, even though I'm not very sporty, as the possession arrow. That flips the little possession arrow and says, we're winning this until you deal with it. Right? If the dised turns the case, even if the case is really big, that argument is the type that demands a specific response. So it's really important to build those type of arguments in. So how do you win a debate? I guess is kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, but to crystallize that question down, some people would tell you by making a lot of arguments. Some people would tell you by making really good arguments. But I think that both of those extremes would miss the point. It depends. It depends on a lot of things, but the core question of breadth versus depth in terms of strategy, how many arguments should you make? How many off-case should you read? How many answers to the dised should you have? Those type of things. The mechanics of it really depend on how you are situated and the circumstances that you're in. So to describe both of them is not to endorse either of them, but I think that some people will benefit a lot from just saying one thing. There was this famous debater from Houston and then eventually of Emory fame, Nick Miller, who was real slow, but just so persuasive. And Nick Miller was never going to make a million arguments, but he sure was going to make that one argument really good. And I think that for him, it made most sense to focus in early in the debate and really explain a couple of arguments really well. Other people, me when I was at Michigan State, when I was still very fast and going for the politics dised all the time, it was much more death by 1,000 cuts. It was, there's all these pieces. The dised turns the case in 7 ways, not just one way, so you're going to drop one of them. And that is another strategy to win debates, but it doesn't work for everyone too, and it has diminishing returns to some margin, so both of them matter. And I think that the ability to recognize both of those as viable strategies is part of what strategizing about debate is. If anyone ever gives you a piece of strategic advice about debate that includes always or never, I am fairly confident they are lying to you, unless they're talking about cheating. Right? Outside of that, you should never do that, and you should always not cheat, right? But for most of these pieces of advice that people give in debate, it depends. Don't run and say, well, Lanning said this. It's about the context, and good debate strategy is knowing when stuff fits and when it doesn't, and you have to work on that. So we've already talked a lot about argument interactions, but I think one of the key strategic concepts that we haven't explored as much here is time as the currency of debate. So you invest time in arguments. You have a finite amount of time, a bank of speech time and of prep time, both in the debate and before the debate in terms of how many practice speeches you can. There's a finite amount of practice speeches you can give before the tournament. Don't let anyone tell you there's infinite prep. Right? There's a concrete amount of times you can do that speech. So I think that you have to think of time as the currency of debate, not just in the debate, but for all of debate. So where are you going to invest your time? And that's a really important question. And I think that if you're following some of the advice given before about controlling what you can control, you've already made that list of these are the things that are directly in our control. And you want to put your time where it's going to get you the most bang for your buck. And the next piece of advice relates to that, but it's kind of distinct, which is spin. Debate is oftentimes the art of making the imperfect work or selling something that is not ideal, but making it work. And I mentioned above that I think that's a very good way to win debates on the affirmative, especially because you speak last. But really the fundamental strategic concept behind this is adaptation and balance. And context. I've spoken to all three of these things, and I think they're the most important concepts, so I'm going to end with them here. But you have to be able to adapt to circumstances, to judges, to opponents. You have to be able to balance all of the strategic concepts that we talked about above. It's Goldilocks. All of this is Goldilocks, and it's about knowing your own context. So you have to know yourself really well before you can start strategizing about debate. But I'm hoping that this lecture and sort of sharing my experience will help give you building blocks to build on. And so these were some of the key concepts that I think matter for debate strategy. So in this part of the lecture, I'm going to give you 10 specific tips, and honestly I could derive 1,000 specific tips, and I'm going to be posting some more of these periodically throughout the season. So this is just 10 things that I came up with that I think you could do right now. You could write them down and remember to do them either before or at the tournament, and they would have an immediate actionable increase in your win percentage based off all of the things that we've talked about before, all the stories, all the quotes, all the concepts, and all of that. So the first piece of advice is I think that if you give a speech, you should record it, and you should very likely redo that speech. There is no speech that you give perfectly the first time, and you should give every speech that you give more than once. You should not be executing on an argument if you are the 2N at a tournament that you have not given a practice speech on. You should not be giving a 2AC on an affirmative if you haven't given that 2AC back at home. So part of this is just give a speech, but record a speech. And that way you have a record of it. Watch yourself. I think that's one of the best ways to improve a debate is to just watch a video of yourself, and so you can see some of the things you're doing wrong, and you would be amazed at what you think is happening versus what is happening when you rewatch on the camera. So I highly recommend that the first thing you do is give speeches, but also record those speeches when you give them. Second, is keep all of your flows. Stop throwing them away. If you're throwing away your flows, keep your flows. They are so important. It's your record of the debate, and it's how you give redos. And I see a lot of debaters after debate just throw their flows away, and it's like, well, one of two of you lost this debate. You think you might want to look back at your notes and work on that. So keep your flows. I have every single flow from every debate that I was ever in, and that is a weird fact, but I do. I have all of my flows from every debate that I was in, and I keep the ones I go back and look at them sometimes. It's a great little walk down memory lane, but it is an essential element of winning debates. If you are going to give practice speeches and do redos to do all the things that I've been suggesting you do, you need your flows. The third specific thing that I think you should do is you should type your judges' comments instead of just listening to them. So my partner Leah, I'm stealing this from her, but she had this document that by the end of her debate career was hundreds of word pages long, and it was everything that a judge had ever said to her. Every time that Adrian Bavero had judged her, she had typed out the comments. So when she was at the NDT for the last time with Adrian, she knew. This was not like a vague recollection. Oh, I think they said this. And so I highly recommend that you keep your judges' comments, even if you write them on your flows, which I did. I didn't type mine because I'm kind of a Luddite, but I think that you should type them so that you have a permanent access to them, and before a debate, if you have that judge again, or when you go home and want to redo the speech, you have the judge's comments. So stop just listening, record all of that stuff. Number 4 is that I think that you should read every judge's philosophy before they judge you in a debate. And this is an easy thing to say in theory, and it doesn't really get done at the tournament. You need to do it before the tournament. This is like, of course, some judges, some spots you want to check right before the debate, but in general, you should have already read through all of the judges' philosophies before you showed up. That should be a thing on your to-do list. You should spend a little bit of time knowing who the people that are going to be deciding if you won or lost a debate think about debate. So you need to know them a little bit. So read the judge's philosophy. That's a very basic principle, but I think doing it before the tournament will help you. And so when it's crunch time before the debate, you won't be scrambling to do that. Number 5 is mine the wiki. When I was in high school, there was no wiki. My partner Leah organized the first casebook for the TOC that we think was complete and shared with everyone. So the wiki is an amazing resource, the college one and the high school one. And if there's something up there that you're missing in your debate tubs, you're missing out. And you should definitely go through the wiki, and it's a huge resource. Look at people's sites and go trace those articles back, or the open source teams that don't mind if you use their evidence. I think those things are incredibly important, and if there's a hole in your argument arsenal and you could have filled it on the wiki, then you have done yourself a disservice by not going there and using that resource. So that's number 5. Number 6 is that thou shalt be a paperless ninja. I think that one of the best ways to impress your judges, to make dates more efficient and give your judges the most decision time, and therefore maximize your chances of succeeding with whatever strategy you take away from this, is to be good at paperless. Practice it. Make sure that time is the unit of currency in debate, and so you need to be efficient and effective at this, and this is one way to be on your judge's good side immediately and to avoid potential moments. So really just work on your paperless skills. Put that into your practice routine. Number 7 is that I think that at every debate tournament you should make one new friend. I mentioned earlier that I think stories and the sort of people that we need in debate and networking are all really important, and I do think that you should constantly be expanding your debate network, and honestly it's just like a good thing to make a friend. So every time you go to a debate tournament, you should make a new friend. Number 8, I think you should introduce yourself and remember who people are. When you debate someone, you should know their names. If someone judges you, you should know their names. So be proactive about introducing yourself. If you're having a conversation in the hallway with someone and you don't know them, introduce yourself. I think that's one of the best ways actually to win more debates. And based off what I've said so far, that won't seem counterintuitive, but if you just took it in isolation, it might not make much sense. The ninth piece of advice, and this is Lanning Coaching 101. I say this to every team that I coach when I travel with them to tournaments: go to sleep. It is so important that you sleep at debate tournaments, and it incredibly frustrates me because I've been very successful at debate and people just don't believe me about this. They're like, no, I gotta stay up and we need this block to this. No, you need to sleep. It is very important for you to be in a regular sleep routine at debate tournaments, and there is no card that you're staying up to cut. There's no block that you're writing. All of those things, first of all, trace backwards, should have happened before you got to the tournament. Right? So you need to plan better so that you have time at debate tournaments to sleep for a full 8 hours every night. Debate tournaments are really hard, and when you do get to the final round of a tournament, you will not believe how exhausted you are. And the difference between losing in the semis and winning in the semis, in my opinion, is oftentimes who got better sleep. And I'm not making that up. It is really important that you sleep at debate tournaments. Number 9 is go to sleep. Number 10 is that you should prep between debates. And this goes without saying for me, but if you just lost a debate on an argument and you're going to think about it later, no, like you have another debate. Stop right then and correct what you can. Write out a block to that argument that you just lost on. Improve your block to that argument. Even if you won a debate. Remember I said earlier, you don't win every argument in a debate. There's certainly something in that debate you could have done better. So use the time in between rounds both to socialize, make a new friend, right? Debate should be fun, but also, don't just, when you're at a debate tournament, that is a chance for you to work too, right? Not the late at night, stay up all night thing, but between debates, that's a good, healthy way to do it. And I think that if you do these 10 things, if you write these down, start doing them now and remember them at debate tournaments, you will win more debates. And we have arrived at the end. I want to thank you so much for being part of the first event of Turns Case. Eric and I are really excited about this, and we think that it could be something really, really awesome for debate. We've invested a lot of time and energy into this, but it is really rewarding work. So I'm so glad that you participated. And if you're saying, oh my gosh, how did we just conclude without talking about practice and debate? Well, one, I think we did talk about all those things. And two, I promised that I wasn't going to cover, so that should surprise no one. But I am going to be posting videos that share some of my thoughts about what you should do to set up a practice routine when you're getting ready for a national tournament, and how you should be behaving in a debate, what each person should be doing and what you should be doing during different parts of the debate. So those are going to be posted sometime tomorrow in addition to the lecture. And honestly, I hope that you got something out of this, but really for all of the people that are watching this, reach out to me, and I want to be an asset for you. And I think that this is the beginning of hopefully a long and productive partnership. And thank you so much for being a part of the First Turns Case lecture series, How to Win with Eric Lanning.